This episode of The Witch Wave is brought to you by Sabbat Magazine, a gorgeous and award-winning magazine that celebrates modern witchcraft and feminism. Now, I've written for Sabbat a whole bunch of times over the years, and I love them dearly. So I'm especially excited to announce their newest project, Le Tarot de l'Étoile Cachée, which translates to the Tarot of the Hidden Star. This is a new tarot deck of 22 major arcana cards, hand-drawn by the enormously talented artist Elisa Seitzinger, with an in-depth guide written by yours truly, and it was my honor. The Tarot of the Hidden Star is ornate, contemporary, bold, and so beautiful, and it's available for pre-order now from sabbatmagazine.com. So head on over to Sabbat Magazine, that's SABAT magazine.com, and order your Tarot of the Hidden Star today. Today's episode is brought to you by Miss Marley, an Australian artist who designs whimsical products with a feminist agenda for witches and other wild folks. Miss Marley was kind enough to send me a Hex the Patriarchy t-shirt, and I am crazy about it. All of Miss Marley's t-shirts are 100% organic cotton, manufactured using renewable energy sources, ethically made, and screen printed by Marley herself using eco-friendly ink in her forest down under. Search for Miss Marley Boutique on Etsy and discover her t-shirts, prints, hand embroideries, and more. And that URL is etsy.com/shop/Miss Marley Boutique. You can see even more of her work on Instagram, and that handle is at MissMarley_art. And if you go to her Etsy shop, you lucky Witch Wave listeners can get 20% off when you enter offer code WITCH at checkout. And that's valid until the end of August of this year. Thanks so much, Miss Marley.
The world is filled with bewitching people, and you might be one too. Welcome to the podcast where art is magic is real, and reality is stranger than dreams. I'm Pam Grossman, and this is The Witch Wave. Hello and welcome to the season finale. Yes, my friends, I'm about to go on summer break, and I admit I'm feeling a little bit emotional about it. So often we're told to make the thing we want to see in the world, and this podcast has definitely been an incredibly meaningful manifestation for me. When I started the Witch Wave this past October, I couldn't imagine how many of you would find it and listen to it and share it, and in many cases, take the time to reach out to me. I want to thank you so very much for your support, for spreading the word, and for sending me so many beautiful emails and messages. I so wish I had the time to respond to each of you individually, but please know that I read everything you send me, and I'm deeply, deeply touched to know that this podcast has been resonating with so many of you. I began it as a wonderful excuse for me to get to speak with so many of my own witchly heroines and heroes. But the fact that together, you, me, and my guests have managed to create our own digital coven along the way makes my heart burst. Now, everything comes in cycles, and that's why I know I need to hit the pause button for a little bit to focus on another creative project that I've been cooking up in my cauldron. I'm going to be taking this summer to finish writing my book. Yes, I have a nonfiction book coming out next year that is all about the archetype of the witch. And you can bet you'll be hearing more about it when the witch wave comes back in the fall. I also already have some truly mind-blowing guests lined up, as well as some other podcast plans that I'm concocting, and I'm super excited about all of it. So please follow us at WitchWavePod on Instagram or Twitter to find out when our second season starts and to keep up with other Witch Wave related news. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because there's still this entire juicy season finale to get to. And there's also so much to celebrate right now. It's Pride Month here in the States, and it's summer solstice this week. So right now is a time to blaze brightly and boldly. Summer solstice, or Litha as it's sometimes called, is the longest day of the year. It's a holy day of solar energy, a day of liveliness and celebration for the life-giving rays of light which shine down on all of us. It's also a day of power, of standing tall and being seen, and of stepping into our own truth. Is there something that you're hoping to manifest, to claim, or reclaim? The summer solstice is the perfect day for this. For my ritual, I love to incorporate objects that are evocative of rays of light. I like to find an obelisk. There are quite a few around New York City. Sometimes you'll find them in graveyards, or I'm sure there's some kind of similar pillar that you might be able to find in your own town. And I love to stand in front of it and feel like it's a bridge connecting me to the sun itself. Additionally, I love to light a tall pillar candle and focus on all of the areas in my life that I want to shine a light on. I think about the boldest truths and wishes that I have for the rest of the year. Because after this day, the nights do begin to grow longer and the light starts to wane. So I think about what I need to focus on and bring my attention and energy to keep myself fortified through the darker half of the year. It's a mid-year spiritual check-in, if you will. And it's also a time to be outside as much as possible, or at least to focus on keeping your own inner fires stoked and strong. And most of all, it's a time to relax and relish. Flowers are blooming, fruits and vegetables are starting to ripen. It's a day of glory and enjoyment and joy. It brings to mind the following poem, which the author may have written about a lover, but that I think works just as mightily as an ode to the sun. This is A Love Song by William Carlos Williams. I lie here thinking of you. The stain of love is upon the world. Yellow, yellow, yellow. It eats into the leaves, smears with saffron the horned branches that lean heavily against a smooth purple sky. There is no light, only a honey-thick stain that drips from leaf to leaf and limb to limb, spoiling the colors of the whole world. You far off there under the wine-red selvage of the West. Ah, so good. And so I wish you a summer that is yellow, 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 and golden and honey-soaked and glowing and full of productive magic. And I think that my two guests today are going to help you get in a really generative mood, because Bill Crisafi and Hogan McLaughlin are two of the most creative souls I know. But before we get to them, first, let's check and see what's come through on the Witch Wire.
Who is it?
Witches!
Sarah writes, I've been listening to your podcast nonstop since I discovered it a couple weeks ago. My interest in witchcraft was recently reignited after being dormant for almost 10 years. Since embracing it back into my life, I've gained a sense of calm and peace that's helped with my personal struggles in ways I never would have imagined. However, there are a couple other people in my life who are struggling with some difficult situations. From my research and prior knowledge, it is best practice to get a person's permission before casting a spell for or on them. Neither of them know about my practice, so I wouldn't feel comfortable asking. I want to send both of these people positive energy and healing to help them deal with their situations. Would it be completely unethical to do so without obtaining their permission? Would there be negative consequences for doing so? Any insight you could provide would be so helpful. Sarah, hello. Thank you for writing. Well, I am delighted you found the podcast and thrilled that you're finding your way back to your practice. That is so, so lovely to read. And let me preface this by saying that you're going to find a lot of different answers to this question depending on who you ask, which I think is a good thing because it means ultimately that you get to decide what feels right to you. But since you're asking me, my take is that it is never a bad idea to send anybody positive energy or love or healing vibes. If we all took time to do that every day, can you imagine what kind of a world this would be? But I think what can get tricky is when we start petitioning or asking for specific things on behalf of other people, because we don't necessarily know what that other person really wants or if a certain desired outcome is actually what's best for them. I've said this before, but it bears repeating, that when someone comes to me for a specific spell, I generally make sure that there is some aspect of that spell that they take ownership over or that they are doing or completing themselves. So if they come to me for a love spell or a spell to help find a job or a blessing for their newborn or whatever the circumstance, it's a collaboration between myself and them. And I always make sure that they have actions to take either during or after our working together. I give them magical homework, if you will. And in my experience, this approach tends to be more effective, and it also makes sure that they are accountable for their own manifestations, which I think is really important. It also ensures that I'm not ego tripping or feeling like I made something happen for someone else, which no one can really do. What we can do is help people to help themselves or heal themselves. But you're not even talking about any of this. You're talking about doing magic on someone else's behalf without them knowing about it. It's a beautiful intention to want to help the people you care about, and it's something that I do a lot myself, which is to ask Spirit to help those I love. I think there's nothing wrong with doing magic for someone else in this capacity if these intentions are kind and clear and loving and open. And doing something quite simple can be really effective. So if you light a candle or make a beautiful altar or do a spell, and as part of this, say something like, "Dear Spirit, thank you for blessing and protecting my friend, Leopoldina. Please help her find her way to love, safety, health, and peace. Blessed be." That can be very effective. It seems so easy, but what you're doing is not only getting assistance from the powers that be, you're also holding space in your heart for the people you care about. And that act of compassion and focus is a true gift. Even better is if you can then match this magic with some action if you're able. Give them a call, buy them flowers, send a note telling them that they matter to you, because that's extremely powerful magic too. I wish you and your friends all the best. Now, on to my guests, Bill Crisafi and Hogan McLaughlin. They are an incredible and incredibly witchy creative couple based in Witch City itself, Salem, Massachusetts. Bill Crisafi is a multidisciplinary artist with a shadowy aesthetic that's a combination of beautiful delicacy and spiky irreverence. Bill has a line of products that feature his irresistible illustrations of witches, poisonous plants, and alchemical imagery. His drawings, photographs, and sculptures are, as he puts it, quote, an extension of the dark nostalgia of New England's past, focusing on themes of folklore and the occult, end quote. And his work has been featured by Vice Creators Project, Unquiet Things, and musician Chelsea Wolfe. He is also one half of Burial Ground, a jewelry line that incorporates woodland magic and Salem aesthetics into their designs. Hogan McLaughlin is a fashion designer, artist, and dancer. His dark, romantic fashion line takes inspiration from fairy tales, fantasy films, and ballet. He was discovered by fashion icon Daphne Guinness, who invited him to design some garments for her, which were then featured in the window display of Barney's New York. This led to multiple runway shows, features in Vogue, Women's Wear Daily, and the New York Times, and a devoted following. Hogan is also an accomplished illustrator whose clients include the HBO series Game of Thrones. It was such a pleasure to get to speak to this Salem power couple about their respective work, their inspirations, and the true magic of collaboration. Bill and Hogan both joined me in person here in my Brooklyn apartment. Bill Crisafi and Hogan McLaughlin, welcome to the Witch Wave.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure.
So this is definitely going to take a little bit of conversational choreography on my part because I have never had two guests at the same time. So thank you guys in advance for your good humor and going with this very bizarre mic setup, which I won't bother to describe to the listener, but we're definitely jerry-rigging things here today. But I want to talk to
both of you individually, because I'm such a fan of both of the work that you guys do. And then I also want to talk about the ways in which you collaborate, about your relationship, ooh, some romance, and make sure that we touch on the ways in which your work is influencing each other too. But I thought I would just start off, Bill, with you, just purely for alphabetical reasons. So, Bill, you're an artist, an illustrator, a jewelry designer, a photographer, a sculptor, all of these things. So my first question is, how do you decide which medium you're going to work in at any given time?
Oh man, I don't know. It's a lot of times where I'm flip-flopping or jumping back and forth, like leaving a drawing and going to making a costume or something, or having an idea for a photograph. So it's hard. I feel like there's no really way to manage it all, but it's weird that like I just have so many different things that I need to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. And yet it feels like all of the work, at least the work that I've seen of yours online and in person, really does have this through line where it all feels like it's kind of part of the same you know. There's a lot of witchcraft, there's a real kind of Victorian New England sensibility. What other things are you trying to convey with your work?
I am really interested in different folklore stories. I took a Grimm's fairy tale class in college, and I think that was just I was working in that sort of narrative anyway, but I think that like sometimes having that vehicle of like, maybe loosely based on something that already exists in a way. I was really interested in the way that the stories change over time. So I think like folklore is definitely a huge inspiration for a lot of my work too. And I don't know, like, I guess like using a lot of symbolism as well is really like important to me. I have these like the same character basically going through different mediums and acting out these different things that I have in my head. So.
And is this kind of that witchly lady character?
Yeah. It's funny because I originally was in fashion design and I went to school at FIT, and I ended up in illustration specialization because I enjoyed construction, but it was really, I just wasn't really good at math and having a hard time getting things perfect, and I'd rather just not. So I did illustration, and I found that I kept drawing the same person over and over again, and she's the same now. Even like if I'm drawing an older crone or a young maiden, it's like the same features and everything. So it's like this person has been like kind of throughout my work for a number of years now.
Where do you think she comes from, and who is she?
Sometimes I wonder that myself. That's like, I probably should go see like the psychologist or something to figure it out. I think like sometimes she could maybe in a way be an extension of myself, or like this ideal, like, I don't know how to describe it.
Jung has this theory that, and I don't know how much I fully ascribe to it, but it is this theory that whatever our gender is, and I realize in this day and age that's such a fluid and malleable word, but his theory is that whatever our gender is, that we have the opposite gender kind of spirit that we want to express. So men have an anima and women have an animus. I think that's the right terminology. So am I trying to understand maybe she's your anima in a way, a female kind of emanation of yourself, or is that too reductive?
I don't know. It could be. I'm not sure. It's just, it's like one of those things, like it got in my head, and then it's like I just always work with that thing. So I guess it could be, definitely. I'm not too sure, but I've also like recently kind of started exploring keeping the same features for this character and having it be on a male body, or like sort of trying to draw things where you're not sure what the gender is, which I think is like, I don't know, an interesting bridge with that too, because I don't know, I realized how much I do kind of stick to that one trope, and so like kind of exploring it in other ways that has to do with like gender and sexuality, I think is like something that I like want to get more into.
And The Witch is such an amazing bridge for that, because we bring so much to that archetype when it comes to gender, sexuality, power dynamics, all of that kind of stuff. What is it about The Witch that started interesting you? I think I read somewhere that when you were really young, you were drawing witches.
Yeah, I have these really funny memories, actually. I remember I used to bring this mop that was from my house, it was like a royal blue handled mop with like a bright yellow, bristle or mop head, and I would pretend to fly on the swing set.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would do that. I always drew witches, and I think when I was getting into high school and things, I was like not. It was still like interesting to me, but there wasn't, I was like exploring more, I was doing ceramics. We were just doing like high school art projects, like random things. So there was a moment where I was sort of like not working with it, but it has literally been like this key thing throughout my work and throughout my life that has always been like with me, where like another like memory that somehow sticks with me is like I remember teaching kids how to draw witches in kindergarten.
Oh,
It's just like really weird.
that's the best.
Yeah, but it would be like the classic Halloween witch, but she was always there, and Salem had always been like a place where I would have my mom bring me there every weekend that she agreed to it, so I could go shopping at all the stores. And
amazing! What an amazing place to grow up near.
It was unlike anything else, for sure.
Well, we're definitely going to talk deep about Salem in a few minutes. But first, Hogan, I want to bring you into the conversation because I think it's so interesting that Bill started in fashion and then became an illustrator and all these things. And my understanding is you also started somewhere else. You were a dancer, is that right, before becoming a fashion designer?
I left high school. I finished high school, but I left high school to join a ballet company in Chicago when I was 16. And I was with them for a number of years before I moved to New York. And meanwhile, I had grown up drawing all my life and had no real goal to become a fashion designer, but I would always draw fashion-forward, stylized things, I think. And
were they costumes for yourself or for some?
No, I'm a huge Disney buff. When I was a kid, one of the first movies I ever saw was Sleeping Beauty, and it's still one of my all-time favorite films ever, just because the sheer artistry behind it. It took them 6 years to make it. The backgrounds are just works of art on their own without the moving characters in the foreground. And
was that Mary Blair who worked on it, or was
Mary Blair did she did the concept art, but Ivan Earle was the actual background illustrator who brought this very angular look to everything. Because before that, with Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, all that stuff, it was very rounded and kind of soft and romantic. But Sleeping Beauty was hyper high gothic, super super stylized, and I just remember being so taken aback by that and interested in it, and that's. To this day, I still probably implement some of those style choices in my fashion.
Oh, yeah. And Maleficent is such a badass character.
One of the best characters of all time, for sure.
I always think of her as a witch, but I know technically she's a dark fairy.
Exactly. Yeah, but she's, it's that type of character that really gets the mind going. And yeah, and so, and then I was illustrating that, and then... my now friend Daphne Guinness, who is the heiress to the Guinness Brewery. She's a singer, a fashion maven in her own
legend.
Right. Yeah, she found my stuff on Twitter of all places, and decided to have those things made into actual pieces. And
so she found your illustrations on Twitter.
Yeah.
Wow.
We had an exchange, and then we just hooked up and collaborated, and the rest is history.
Social media, that's one of the nicest social media stories I've ever heard.
Yeah, and then now my fiance, we met on social media. So,
You guys
Instagram.
met on Instagram?
Yeah.
Aw, you're an Insta couple.
Power of social media. Yeah.
Exactly. Good testament to it. I feel like we have so many terrible social media stories these days.
Yeah.
It's nice to be reminded that wonderful things can happen. I mean, hey, I met you guys because of social media, so there we go. But Hogan, I want to just take a step back. So were you still thinking you were going to be a professional dancer and you were doing these illustrations kind of for fun, or were you already pivoting to the art world?
It could have been a blessing or a curse, but I joined my goal company from the beginning. Like I grew up watching Hubbard Street. I was obsessed with them, and then I got a chance to join them. So I was kind of like, I reached my peak already at age 16, and I still had ambitions to dance elsewhere, but I think that I also have a very like scattered mind where I want to be doing, like Bill, like you just want to keep doing as much as you can within any realm that you are taken with. And so I did a few pickup jobs in New York, and I still do a few things in Chicago here and there when I have the time.
And it's a ballet company? Forgive me, I'm not the most dance knowledgeable.
I use ballet because I think when you say like modern contemporary ballet or something like that, a lot of people either don't know it or they're very familiar with like So You Think You Can Dance, which is its own style to itself. Hubbard Street has a very like European choreographer repertoire.
So this wouldn't be like Martha Graham or that school?
No,
okay.
They might have done Martha. The company was established in the 70s, so it's had this through line for years now. But now it's become more like very focused on contemporary choreographers from like all around the world, bringing them in and doing sort of like evening length pieces.
How phenomenal.
Yeah.
So you were doing your illustrations in parallel to the dance, and then this legend woman finds your drawings on Twitter, and then she asks you to have some, is it a gown made, or what was it that she wanted?
We did two pieces that ended up in this film that we were doing, and one was a red leather cat suit that kind of looked like articulated musculature. And then another was a pair of shoes that had these metallized wings that kind of looked like armor. And then like the social media press and everything dubbed them the knife boots, so that's what they've become now.
Amazing.
And then they were in the windows of Barney's that coincided with the McQueen exhibition at the Met. So that was like a pinch me moment. This is my first time in fashion, and all of a sudden like this is what this is the standard I'm at.
This is a pretty unbelievable story, I have to say, Hogan.
I hope that the listeners aren't like, what is this happening? Like, are you?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're just such a lovely person, so it couldn't happen to a lovelier person, but you're so gifted that, I mean, it sounds like the stars just really aligned, but now you're doing the hard work of having a fashion line.
Yeah, it's at the beginning, I think coming off the tail end of doing that stuff with Daphne, there was a lot of attention and everything for when I launched my first line maybe half a year afterwards after I did that, and it was small, but there was good press on it. There was a good like tailwind from it,
and you suddenly just had to learn how to even do that. Did Daphne kind of mentor you in that process? My friend, she used to be in the costume shop at Hubbard Street when I was dancing, and she's like old school goth, like she wears the platforms, the Doc Martens every day. Yes. Like we just sort of, every time I would have a fitting, we like had really good vibes. So we struck up a friendship, and she is one of the most talented people I know. She can look at anything and make it tailor-made for a body. And she has said that she loves working on my stuff because it's like a puzzle piece, because I have so many style lines and things that go into it. So we have a long-standing collaboration, friendship. And she still does my couture evening wear stuff for my line. How fabulous. So, talking to both of you, you obviously have some kind of shared aesthetic. I mean, some of the words that come to mind when I look at Hogan, your fashion, and Bill, your artwork, is, of course, romantic, goth, cinematic, theatrical, dark. You know, there's a real current of magic and occult in there. Do you see your work as influencing each other at all, or did you just happen to both have this aesthetic and then you fell in love?
Yeah, I think like it's funny because some people will even see our drawings and actually this happened very recently. My mom was asking me about a pin that Hogan made, but she wasn't sure if I drew it or he drew it. But I think we just naturally have the same sort of style in that way. And I'm sure we like subconsciously influence each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think we met because of being in the realm of the dark artists that exists right now on Instagram and things like that. Like, we just sort of found each other, not through each other's artwork per se, but just, and it happened. I think we do have similar styles, but we also have very different styles as well.
For sure.
I think we both work in very, very detailed things, but I think... And I don't mean this as an offense, but I think that yours is a bit more like wild, maybe. Like, and I think that I think mine is a little more contained. Yeah.
So Bill's is a little more loose.
Yeah.
And Hogan's, yours is a little more structured. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I know this is probably an obvious comparison, but the person who keeps coming up for me when I look at both of your work is Edward Gorey. You're like, yes, I know.
I got a lot of that this weekend at the Oddities Market.
But I mean that as such a high compliment because he was such an artist and obviously has those New England roots as well that you have, Bill. Was he someone that influenced you growing up or not so much?
I mean, I knew of his work growing up, and I had friends who were really into it, but I had never, like, paid a ton of attention to him. I definitely liked it, and I think I appreciate it more now, especially seeing that I get that comparison a lot. And so I went one year for my birthday, I went and visited his house and everything.
It's so awesome. His tarot card collection.
So good.
So mind-blowing.
But yeah, so he wasn't like a massive influence on me. The person who actually was, though, was Tim Burton, his early work. And I remember I was actually in school here when he had his opening at the Met, and I was the first person in line to meet him at like 6 a.m.
How fabulous.
It was so funny. So
yeah, I think that show was at MoMA.
Oh, yeah. MoMA. I'm sorry. Yeah, MoMA. My bad.
Oh, not at all. I loved that show.
Yeah.
And he is someone who's very close to my heart too. So I definitely see that now that you mention it.
For sure. Yeah, he's really I love, like, I actually transferred out of FIT to like possibly pursue animation. I ended up taking animation courses, but the new school that I went to works like you any class you take goes towards your major. So I was doing sculpture, animation, and then welding and woodworking.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was like a lot of different things. So animation ended up like not being a huge focus just because it wasn't like a really rigid, like, I don't know, regimented schedule. You were able to do like a bunch of different things, and because I'm scattered with the way I work,
multifaceted.
Yeah, multifaceted. It may not have been not the best thing, but it worked out.
Yeah. And Hogan, who are some of your influences? I mean, obviously I want to talk about like McQueen and Iris Van Herpen and like all these amazing dark fashion designers, but is there anyone else?
I think I've always been, before I even knew that I wanted to be in fashion, I was drawn to John Galliano's work because it's so theatrical, and the stuff he did for the Dior Couture shows it's just mind-boggling what he was able to accomplish in those shows. And yeah, definitely the dark artists as well. I mean, I love Rick Owens. I wouldn't say it's a major influence on my work, but it's probably more influence on my life, like what I wear and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that mainly I don't really like look to other designers for inspiration. I appreciate and respect them. I have a ton of coffee table books of everything possible, and I love just looking at them, but I don't really get inspired by that because I think my past in dance is what really inspires me, because I try to, a signature thing that I always try to do is like style lines that draw your attention to different parts of the body, and I think that having sort of, I guess, luckily a heightened awareness of the human body because I partnered with people all my life and am more hyper aware of my own body through that. I think that's what I try to like evoke through what I'm doing with fashion.
Beautiful. So guys, we're just going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Today's episode of The Witch Wave is brought to you by Blood Milk Jewels. I have loved Blood Milk for years because each piece of their jewelry has a story that adds to its aesthetics and talismanic qualities. Their designs are inspired by seances and surrealism and shadowy goddesses and so many more of my favorite things. They use materials like sterling silver and natural crystals and gemstones such as moonstone, labradorite, and onyx. And so each piece is crafted to be psychic armor. I also love that they've been handmade in Philadelphia using local resources since 2008. And that it's a female-owned and operated company. So check out bloodmilkjewels.com and adorn yourself with dark, sparkling beauty.
Welcome back to the Witch Wave. Today I'm speaking with Salem power couple Bill Crisafi and Hogan McLaughlin. So we were just talking about some of your influences. I would love to talk about the place you guys live, which is Salem, Witch City. And I imagine that might have some sort of influence on your work, or you might be infusing your work with some of that Salem spirit. Do you think that's right?
Definitely. Actually, it's sort of a funny story. When I was living in New York, going to school here, I would go back to Massachusetts every weekend because where I was living like in Midtown, which is like horrendous.
The opposite of a woodland countryside.
Right. So I would be leaving as much as possible to be back in nature and go for walks outside and look at all the old homes. And there's this one park that I really love that my friends and I always went to. And I think this is sort of tied into what Jamie and I do with Burial Ground.
Which is your jewelry line.
Which is the jewelry line, yeah. So when there was one time we were walking through the park and I had a huge illustration project to do, which was we had to do 3 different collections. This was my final.
At FIT.
At FIT,
okay.
Yeah. So I had to design all these clothes, and I was going and collecting specimens from this park. I would get milkweed and little pieces of lichen and little twigs and brambles and things, and using that in my mood board with my swatches. And so the clothing was completely influenced by New England landscapes, and then the construction was very sort of this abandoned looking, I don't know, Massachusetts home that you'd stumble upon in the woods or something like that.
Like a dilapidated, romantically ruined kind of house.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, precisely. So
I'm picturing Addams Family vibes. I don't know if that's maybe a little more rundown than that.
Yeah, it was definitely a little bit more rundown, and it was. I used a lot of color too. It was there were lots of amoeba-y looking silks and weird hairy white, I don't know, when you open up a milkweed and all the seeds come out, things like that. So it's completely ingrained into me. There's nothing I can do about it. And anything that I do, I feel like it always shows up in some form or another, whether it's architecture that I draw, or if I'm making a costume, I feel like there's some sort of influence of the area in that, which is, I'm forever grateful to grow up where I did, because it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. And Hogan, you didn't grow up in Massachusetts, right?
No, I didn't. I grew up just outside of Chicago, but I actually, when I was 14, I think I did a training program at the Boston Ballet growing up, and I visited Salem on the weekend with my family and loved it. And in 7th or 8th grade, I believe, I was in a English class where we read The Crucible, and I just remember being obsessed with the story. And that same year we read Macbeth, which is another witch thing that was just super, super influential in my mind at that time. So I think that the nostalgia was always there for me, but I'd never actually considered living there until, obviously.
Bill lured you there in sticky web.
Yeah, so, but it's a fantastic place to live. And our first collaboration was, I was releasing my spring 2016 line, 17 line, I can't remember. and he did the photography for it in the Pioneer Village, which is 1690, was it? Or
It's a replica village that was actually in the beginning of Hocus Pocus. So it's all the thatched roofed huts and everything. It's smack dab in the middle of this park that you would never even know is there unless you go beyond the gate.
Yeah,
really
so
cool.
when you're there, you can't help but be inspired by your surroundings, and New England is fantastic. It's gorgeous. I'm cherishing my time there.
Yeah, it's interesting, Salem as a place, because obviously it's this space of such pain. I mean, it was a real tragedy that happened there. And shout out to my friend Dave, who actually grew up in Danvers, who always says, well, Danvers is actually where it happened.
Yep.
And he's like, we just have a very modest, statue. We don't have a whole town about it. I know that Salem, as it is now, it is kind of this monument, this living monument to this tragedy, and yet it is also a commercial place and a tourist place, and there is kind of an interesting friction there that I know some people call out and say, oh, so this terrible thing happened and now there's nothing but gift shops there. And yet when I go, I feel this real sense of like reclamation and healing, because all of these people were killed in the name of witchcraft, probably not witches, maybe some were, but probably not most of them. And yet now it attracts all these people who love the archetype of the witch, who want to wave their witch flag, who want to live in a spirit of freedom, and, who to celebrate their quote unquote outsiderness and have a place where they belong. So I don't know. Do you sense some of that tension when you're living there?
Yeah, I think that that's like a really, I feel like current conversation. Because when people come to visit, I like to give them like the key places to go, because you can get caught into some sort of not so great tourist trap while you're there. And I think that the history of like Lori Cabot opening up her shop in Salem, where she was basically like, yeah, maybe she was maybe capitalizing on this area, or I'm sure she didn't think of it in that way at the time.
And for listeners who don't know who she is, can you fill them in a little bit?
Oh, for sure. She is the official witch of Salem and the creator of the Cabot tradition. And she's amazing, and opened up the first witch shop, which then I think like a lot of people followed suit. And I think that that's sort of interesting to the area that maybe people don't realize, because this tragedy happened that isn't being maybe honored in the best way, or on the surface isn't being honored in the best way. But every time you go to a museum, you're given the correct information of what actually happened and what the witch trials are. And then these shops are educating you on something else, like what the craft is, or different, even different, a ton of different versions of it, or different religions and traditions. So I think that that's really important to note. But I also totally agree with, like, there are things that, I'll draw or something and I'm like, I don't know if someone will understand. Like, what if this is taken the wrong way? It's like such a fine line where people want to see something and say, oh, witch, like that witchy or whatever, when really it's like a tragic thing as well. So it's definitely like a sensitive subject.
Yeah. And Hogan, I imagine that you working in the fashion industry now, you have to travel quite a bit.
Yes.
How are you balancing your Salem life with New York City fashion industry, or Paris fashion industry, or wherever else you have to go for work?
It's a bit of a challenge, to be honest, because Salem is fantastic for all of the reasons that we've been discussing. It's gorgeous, but it's a small town, and what I want to achieve is, going to a next level with, the trajectory of everything that I'm doing, and it's already sort of gotten to that next step, so it's kind of like do or die at this point. So Didn't
you design for Lady Gaga recently?
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, but I did a few things for her tour. I think it was the Born This Way ball or something.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So things are exploding for you.
Yeah, it's, with any kind of profession, it's kind of got its highs and its lows. And
sure.
I'm kind of in this point right now where it's sort of like getting up to the top of that roller coaster, but it's not slow, but it's definitely steady, which is something that, you know, you have to recognize and take full advantage of. So yeah, I am traveling to New York and Chicago and overseas and here, there, and everywhere every other week, which is exhausting, and I don't get to see Bill, and I don't get to see the cats as much as I would like to. So
Yeah.
we're it's something that right now is hard to figure out what the actual solution to that is.
Yeah.
But
Does Salem feed you when you're there?
it does. There are aspects of it that we just like, I've been there for 2.5 years now, and there are traditions that we have just by going to the local coffee shop, and our studio is right in the downtown area that we both work out of, and
It's home.
yeah, I mean, there are so many things that just make you feel warm about it, but at the same time, it's like, for me, I'm like, this seems like a place that I would love to retire in eventually, but at this point, who knows, you know, what.
Yeah.
Where the broom will take you.
Exactly. I want to get back to the specifics of your work. Bill, for those who haven't yet had the pleasure of seeing your amazing Instagram and both your personal shop and the burial ground shop online, and we'll tell them how to find it in a little bit. But you know, what I love about, first of all, your drawings and illustrations in particular is they have this wit about them. You draw lots and lots of witches and Victorian women, or now I know it's the same woman, but you also have this really great kind of tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. A couple of my favorite pieces of yours, you have a t-shirt that I'm so sad I didn't buy. I need to get on that because I think it might be sold out now, but it was the Not This Pussy shirt. And if you could describe that for listeners.
For sure. So it was shortly after the Trump election. I drew a crone flying on a broomstick dumping Trump from a very high point in the sky. And she's screaming, "Not this pussy," to him. And I did that to raise money for Planned Parenthood. And then I did a couple other runs for it. And then I also raised money for the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I think I try to not be super political on my Instagram just for personal reasons, because I don't know, especially this climate now, there's so many important conversations to have. And I don't know, my mother is like a huge inspiration to me. I've had like very strong women, influence me throughout my entire life, and just knowing what was going on was just so unacceptable and upsetting. So that drawing was just hopefully a way to like do some good for what was going on.
It's so fantastic.
Thank
And
you.
You also have a pin that says "Ride or Die." And it's, yeah.
This is pre-Witch too, before Black Phillip existed.
Really? And
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the film The Witch, because
man.
you guys must have lost your minds when it
Yeah.
came out. I certainly did, and I don't even live in New England.
I thought Robert Eggers was in my head or something. I'm hoping I pronounced his name right.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. There's something, I always have to have a little humor in my artwork. I'm a huge like Labyrinth and Dark Crystal fan, and I feel like there's
Same, yes.
And they have this, it's like gorgeous, ridiculous, puppets, and then they are funny. There's a bunch of humor in that. So I feel like that's probably where I always get these like dumb dad jokes in my head, and I'm like, I'm gonna do an illustration of this. But I don't know, I can't help it.
Well, I'm gonna tell everybody to get their shot glass ready, because I'm gonna use the phrase I use all the time on the podcast, which is reverent irreverence. And that's what I love. You have that spirit in your artwork, and it's so beautiful.
Thank you.
And Hogan, you have a lot of different styles and different fabrics that you work in. I mean, I was going through your catalog, for lack of a better word, your website, and looking at different seasons that you put out, and some of them feel like slightly more structured, and others feel like very velvet and romantic, and then they all still feel of a piece. They feel like made for the haute couture witch or something.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear about how you're navigating all of these different styles.
Yeah, I think, again, my focus is on the body, and I like to have a through line. I think this is like my 8th collection that I'm working on right now, 8th or 9th.
Amazing.
And I like to have, in my head, it's just one giant runway show that's never ending, that's going to be throughout my career, which I think is important to sort of establish your voice as a designer. There were a few things, like I did this holiday collection that had very floaty mesh tulle skirts with a velvet top and stuff, and that wasn't sort of in my canon of, fall, winter, spring, summer. That was just kind of like a holiday fun thing that I wanted to do.
It's breathtaking. Totally gorgeous.
And velvet is so nasty to work with, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I decided, this will be a standalone thing. I don't think I'm going to really sell it because it costs too much to make. No one's going to want to pay the retail price for it. So I'm just going to have photo shoots with it and have fun with it. But everything else, I don't know. I love doing fantasy stuff, and I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, huge Tolkien fan. Game of Thrones, which I've worked with. I did illustrations for their official DVD.
Fabulous!
2 seasons of the TV show. So the fantasy realm is always there for me, and I can't escape it, no matter, and I would never want to.
Yes.
So yeah, I like to think of having sort of a similar aesthetic for the entire, for everything I do.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And on that, we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back.
Native Apothecary merges magic and medicine with their ethically wild-crafted plant spirit remedies and ceremony oils. And I gotta tell you, having tried them myself, they are very effective. I especially love their Gatekeeper elixir, which uses plant essences like mugwort and hawthorn to help increase intuition and put you in a more receptive state of mind to receive messages and guidance from the spirits. Native Apothecary also offers herbal potions to help heal your heart, shield you from negative energy, boost your vitality, and so much more. And great news, you can get 10% off using offer code WITCH at nativeapothecary.net. So go on and let Native Apothecary connect you to the land and bring you to a place of healing and wholeness. Go to nativeapothecary.net and use offer code WITCH for 10% off their magical plant elixirs.
Welcome back to the Witch Wave. Today I'm speaking with Bill Crisafi and Hogan McLaughlin. So I want to get a sense of your relationship individually with the archetype of the witch. Certainly I see that current and that energy channeled in both of your work, but do either of you have a spiritual practice? Do you guys consider yourselves witches? What comes to mind when the word witch is brought up?
Well, I think out of respect to people that do identify as witches, I would not personally identify as a witch, but there are so many aspects to the religion and the practice and just everything that resonate with me. So no, I don't ritually do things, but I think rituals can be their own thing unto themselves, whether it's going to a walk in the forest or, lighting a candle or an incense or a Palo Santo stick or something. I don't know. It's just things like that you don't really, the everyday things that probably are just part of a practice or something,
And so much of fashion is transformational. I mean, you're creating new shapes and allowing people to shape shift when they wear your outfits. So to me, that feels very magical in a way.
Yeah, I think everyday magic is always present. I think my biggest thing is that there's so much work within what I'm doing right now and travel and everything that it's hard to lay down a practice. And I try to, I guess my thing is I try to do some form of yoga every day, and that's sort of my own ritual, my own church type thing, because your mind just goes crazy, especially if you're in any kind of art world. You need something to balance you, and I think that so many people respect witchcraft and things like that because it brings them a balance in their life. So yeah, totally.
Yeah. What about you, Bill?
Yeah, I would say that I do. It's like I remember when I first talked to you when you were in Salem, and I was telling you how much your intro to this podcast resonates with me, saying art is magic and magic is real. I think that I get into this like ritualistic space every time that I am drawing or making a costume or something like that. And even talking about Hogan's fashion with transformation is a huge part of my artistic identity, I think, where like I try to push that as far as I can to make myself something else or make myself this being. And I've done a few rituals with friends, where I use some of my costumes or make a mask for it, and you get into this different space. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in. And I have my own daily like small rituals that I do privately that aren't anything huge, but they're important to me, and they help me start a day. So I would say, yeah, in that way.
Bill, you said when you were little, you loved witches. And a question that I've gotten from quite a few listeners who've emailed are, people who identify as male, they're dudes, and they say, hey, I love the podcast, but, you've had a lot of ladies on here, and how can I, as a man, kind of enter into the world of the witch? Is the witch for me too? And I'd love to hear either of your thoughts on that, but Bill, let's start with you.
I think the witch is for men, and I think that I think that recognizing its feminine qualities and the importance of femininity or like that energy is something that anyone can harness. And I think that having men being interested in it is super important, and it's about getting in touch with that side. But again, it's not just a feminine practice. It's it has both poles. And I think that anyone can do it if they want to. It's for everyone.
And it strikes me, Bill, that you draw mostly this female kind of witch woman, and Hogan, you mostly design for women. I don't know if you've done any collection for men yet, but that's really interesting to me that as men, your creative space is very feminine.
Right.
Have you identified it in those terms, or not quite?
Yeah, I would say so. I think just it's inherent. Like growing up, I was attracted to the female characters and shows and movies and stuff. And I think maybe that had to do with the fact that they had some great clothes, and I was destined to be a clothing person. But I don't know. I think, I just think that that's always been there.
Right. It's I had a conversation with a cousin of mine sort of recently, and she was like, I've always remembered you being into the female archetypes, whether it be mermaids or witches or anything like that. It's always been so fascinating to me, but the witch had definitely been like always my main focus. And I don't know. I actually was recently, this is my like new thing where Hogan and I had talked about, he introduced me to RuPaul's Drag Race.
Do you guys know how obsessed
Yes,
I am with this show?
And so this is like
restraining myself.
No,
Go ahead, you talk. You're the guest. You're the guest. You're the guest.
And I I think about it, and I'm like, well, we're talking about like transformation and things like that, and I am considering in my wildest dreams where I really put the energy into it, but becoming the hag queen, where I could be like maiden mother crone reveals on the runway. Yeah, copywritten. No, so I really like, that was another thing that in itself, those performances and that energy is like, oh my God, like the best. And I feel like that is, I don't know, that's a very witchy thing, I think, too. And I want to just like completely destroy the competition.
100%. I would love to see your version of this. Man. I think it would be so beautiful. And that actually reminds me, there was, I believe it was a photograph and also a drawing you did, Bill. And I believe it's both of you dressed up as kind of the alchemical marriage.
Oh, yeah.
So one of you is the sun and one of you is the moon. And it's so gorgeous. And I thought it was such a beautiful metaphor as well for relationships, for love, for the creative process. Can you talk a little about what that project was, or that image was from?
Yeah, I actually drew that while we were staying at his sister's house in Brooklyn. I drew it on the day of the solar eclipse, and we had the idea to recreate it for Halloween this year. And
so the drawing came first.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I had asked Hogan if he'd like to make the robes, and I'll make the headpieces. And we recreated the drawing in Woodstock, New York, when we were spending a weekend with friends there. It was a really fun process because we haven't really worked like that yet, and so it was really cute. Like, Hogan was worried about like the fabrics he was choosing, like if it were something that I was like thinking of, or like if I liked it. Like, I feel like you were a little hesitant about that, but I was like, no, seriously, just do whatever you want for the robes. Like, make it, make that part yours, and I'll make the headpieces, and we'll, I don't know, bring it together. And we looked at was it Galliano makeup, or was it?
Oh yeah, it was a Galliano show.
The Russian Brides.
Yeah, it was
something
a while ago, but they have very like cherry stained lips, kind of, and the almost like silent movie eyebrows type thing. Like
pearlized skin and stuff like that. So we had a lot of fun doing that. We were racing until the last minute. I was like gluing like fake pearls onto the headpieces.
And then we only wore them for like an hour because they were so cumbersome.
They were huge, yeah. But it was fun.
Yeah.
It was
And this
a lot
was
of fun.
just for a photo shoot for
it was just
you guys, or was it for a certain?
No, we just did it for us.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We went with a bunch of friends to a cabin in Woodstock, so we just all kind of did our own costume, had dinner. We were going to go out in the town, like out to the town where they were having like the Halloween parades and stuff. But
we thought it would be a lot quieter than Salem, and it turns out Woodstock is like completely bumping on Halloween. So we just went back to the house, and I think we had a fire and called it a night.
Oh my God. Can I just say though that sounds like a dream Halloween, just like spending all day doing beautiful costumes and photo shoots and
so
having
fun.
a feast. And
We always try to do that every year. We always get out of Salem. It's almost like a law that you have to.
Yeah. I've heard it's pretty tough. I've never
Yeah.
been there in October, but it sounds really challenging.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of the alchemical marriage. When my husband and I got married, we had a lot of like secret alchemy symbols in our wedding and in our wedding bands and things. Well, I guess not so secret anymore, but and that idea of two things becoming this third thing, this third mind, something that transcends both of you, I think is such a beautiful kind of formula, a magic formula, if you will. And I so admire the ways in which you're able to work together because not a lot of couples can necessarily do that. I think it's really magnificent. And so I have to ask, you use the word fiance. Do you have a wedding date planned? I'm imagining your wedding is going to be ridiculously beautiful. Like, what are the details? I'm not inviting everybody or myself. I just want to vicariously hear a little about this.
we have ideas that we've talked about. I think tentatively we're trying to aim for sometime next fall, but work gets in the way a lot, so
Sure.
it's not that we've put it on the back burner, it's just that we've displaced our focus.
We do have a few very ridiculous ideas though that I don't know if they'll actually happen, but do you know the medieval wedding in The Love Witch, like when they get married in the
Of course.
So we were thinking of having actors acting out the wedding the next day at brunch, which would be a recreation of that wedding basically.
Amazing.
I don't know, just I've been researching industrial fog machine rentals and and medieval candelabras.
Oh, it'll be the wedding of the century, darling.
If we end up doing it all, but we'll figure. I mean,
that's how our minds work, though. We're like, oh, this would be so fun to do. Like, not even just for a wedding, but just in life. And it'd be like, oh, this is great. And then we forget about it. And then it comes back to us.
Right. It'll happen. It'll be like an organic, I'll just bring all of the candles from our house and we'll place them at some ruined castle, and then that'll be it.
Oh, sounds like a dream. Well, listen, Bill and Hogan, I have a million more questions as always, but we need to wrap things up. Before we go, where can people find out more about your work? What are your handles, websites, all that jazz?
You can find me on Instagram at Bill Safi, so it's Bill Safi, or my website, which is billcrisafi.com. And you can find the jewelry that I make with my best friend Jamie Moores at Burial Ground on Instagram or burialground.org.
Perfect.
My Instagram is my name, Hogan McLaughlin. My website is hogan-mclaughlin.com. I don't currently have like my clothing for sale just because I'm working with boutiques and stuff like that. And but my illustration website is linked there as well, so you can get all of that stuff there. And
pins and goodies and t-shirts and things, or
they come in and out when I have a chance to like focus on that, you know. Which I never want to put on the back burner, but
no, of course. Yeah. Well, Bill has tons of amazing tote bags and t-shirts and pins and prints for sale on his site too, if people need some fashion immediately. So Hogan, while we're waiting for your stuff to show up, we'll go to Bill's site. Guys, thank you so much. Congratulations on your pending wedding. That's thrilling. So and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
That's it for the show. Thank you again to Bill Crisafi and Hogan McLaughlin for joining me and inspiring me with their vision and their love. And that's it for the first season of The Witch Wave. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed making it, and I hope you have a magical summer. I'm looking so very much forward to meeting you back here when season 2 launches in the fall. But until then, do you have questions, feedback, need some witchly advice, or just want to share something magical that happened to you recently? Drop me an email at witchwavepodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, and you just might make it on the Witch Wire. The Witch Wave is produced and recorded by me, Pam Grossman. This episode was edited by Chiquita Pascal. Thanks, Chiquita. And myself. Our theme music is by Lycanthia. Special thanks go to Matt Freeman. You can check out information about this and other episodes on our website, witchwavepodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on iTunes and give us lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of stars. It really does make a huge difference, and I'd be so grateful to you, and please keep spreading the word. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and if you have an iPhone, you might dig my witch emoji for iMessage. Fill your texts with witches, spellcraft objects, and magical symbols in a variety of skin tones, genders, and colors by searching for Witch Emoji, that's all one word, in the App Store, or by going to witchemoji.com. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for a wondrous first season. Witches are the future. I'll catch you next time on The Witch Wave.